What are some of the most common symptoms you're seeing with people with histamine issues?
Yeah. So some of the common symptoms are migraines, skin issues. We have a lot of mast cells. So mast cells are the white blood cells that do release histamine along with other inflammatory chemicals. So we have a lot of those in our skin. They're really all over the place, but we do have a lot in our skin. So a lot of eczema, other types of dermatitis, flushing, you'll see hives. And just so you know, I hate saying hives because people will think, oh, well, I don't have hives. I don't have this. This is just for some people. It's not for everybody. Vertigo can be really common. You can notice one thing that I always noticed is when I was eating certain foods, my ears would get really itchy, ear or full, so that full feeling in your head, or your head feels kind of heavy, or itchiness in the eyes, ears, nose, that type of thing. And then a really common symptom is insomnia, because histamine really wakes up the brain. And the longer we go through the day, the more histamine we're collecting, right, in our bodies. So at night, when you go to try to fall asleep, you may notice your brain's kind of really wide awake. And that's because histamine wakes up the brain. So that, and then congestion, a lot of people have that constant congestion. And we do know that this can be tied to gut issues, not related to histamine intolerance, but also it can be related to histamine intolerance.
Yeah.
That racing heart when you're eating, or just randomly, you get a racing heart, or if you go, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, can be really tied with mast cell activation syndrome. So when you go from sitting to standing, if you get dizzy and your heart starts racing, that's kind of common. And then there's some other stuff that's not so, common, maybe, or well known, is anxiety or panic attacks or other psychological issues, because of histamine's effect on the brain. And then there's something that some people have, not everybody, but it's called dermatographia. And that's where you basically can draw on your skin. So you kind of run your fingernail down your skin and you can see a line. And that's, again, because we have a lot of mast cells in our skin. So those are some of the less common symptoms. When people think they're allergic to the sun, people say, I'm
Yeah.
allergic to the sun. Well, they kind of really are. Um, that, and what else? There's just a lot. There's it's really kind of random stuff throughout the body. Feeling like you have interstitial cystitis, or we see people have chronic UTIs, and there's a lot of mast cells in our bladder. So, or people who have issues with breathing, like asthma, there's a lot of mast cells in the lining of our lungs. So those are kind of some, the major things we talk about with mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance.
Yeah. So it really covers a very wide gamut of different symptoms. And what are some of the root cause factors for somebody developing this?
So some of the main root cause, mast cell activation syndrome is, to me, the number one probably cause. And just a little kind of backstory on what that is. What our mast cells do is, when we have a threat, so let's say we have a virus, our mast cells are going to secrete these inflammatory chemicals, and that's the type of inflammation we want to have. And that's going to allow our immune system to kind of do its job, right? But we then want everything to calm down after, and we want to metabolize those inflammatory chemicals and get rid of them, and then everything goes back to normal. So when you have mast cell activation syndrome, your mast cells perceive things that aren't really that threatening as a threat. So they may perceive cold weather as a threat. They may perceive hot weather as a threat. They may perceive smelling someone's perfume as a threat. And you're going to start dumping those inflammatory chemicals and just feel really crappy. So that's kind of what mast cell activation syndrome is in a nutshell. It's like very sensitive mast cells. And we see this along with a lot with people with post-COVID or long hauler syndrome. Their mast cells were really active during the virus, and then they became very sensitive after the virus. And now they're continuously pouring out those inflammatory chemicals. So that's one thing. Anything having to do with the gut. So leaky gut, opportunistic bacteria in the gut that can actually produce histamine, the kind of bacteria that we don't want. There's good bacteria that we do want, and then there's bacteria we don't want. Yeast overgrowth, parasites, H. pylori, all of those things can really affect how much histamine we're releasing, or how, when we break down the histamine, the enzymes that we are born with to break down this histamine, and mainly that DAO enzyme that's in the lining of the gut, that can really disrupt that. So that's disrupted. So when you're releasing the histamine, you therefore can't really break it down as much. There can be genetic mutations like in that DAO enzyme and other enzymes that relate to this. And then there can be some vitamin deficiencies. So like vitamin B6, copper, and vitamin C are the ones we see the most. And when I say this, I like to kind of note, do not take copper if you don't know you need copper, because you probably have seen this in practice, David. Most people have too much, right?
Oh
Copper
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
compared to zinc. And yeah, so you don't just want to take copper. You want to actually test your copper to zinc ratio. And there's some other things you want to test. So that irritable bowel disease. So again, that's a really a lot of inflammation in the lining of the gut. And so that can really break down the enzyme that breaks down histamine. And then medication, like there's a lot of medications, including antihistamine medications, which can reduce your body's ability to break this down on its own. And then some things that we, are talking about more lately are mold. I can tell you that, I having mast cell activation syndrome, when I lived in mold, I thought I was dying. I mean, I didn't know that I had mold, which is odd because I can smell mold from a mile away. I actually was not able to smell the mold that I was sleeping on top of for the most part. And I literally went through about 6 months of thinking I was just dying, not knowing what was going on because all my testing was coming out normal. So mold really, really triggers our mast cells. It really aggravates them and it really makes them release a lot of these inflammatory chemicals. And then, a lot of stuff I've been seeing lately is the EMF exposure. So that's our electromagnetic field that comes from our Wi-Fi and, all the things that we have, going on. Within the last, 20 years or so, it's gotten more and more and more with the cell phones and the 5G and all that. That can really aggravate your mast cells and make you feel horrible. So those are the biggest things that I see contributing to this.